Every form of Luffy from One Piece explained. Having had his story told in One Piece for over 25 years now, Monkey D. Luffy has displayed a wide and fantastical variety of abilities and techniques, stemming from his simple power of having a rubber body. Today we'd like to walk you through the 8 different forms this comical but powerful character has taken during his journey to find the titular One Piece, as well as their respective strengths and weaknesses. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Base form / Gear 1. Let's start off with the form of Luffy that's had the most screen time and development across the story. His base form, where he makes use of the regular powers of his Gomu Gomu no Mi without making any enhancements to himself. In his ordinary state, insofar as you can call it ordinary, Luffy can stretch any part of his body by applying sufficient force to it, such as by throwing a punch that extends his fist for several meters, as well as inflate his torso by inhaling a large amount of air. Rigorous training from his grandfather and spending his childhood surviving in a jungle region has also made him superhumanly strong, with an endless will to live. Furthermore, he's almost completely immune to electricity due to being insulated against it and most blunt force attacks, though the latter changes with the introduction of Haki later in the series, and has a unique workaround to the water-based weakness of Devil Fruit users by being able to, with the help of others, stretch his neck to extend his head above any water he's trapped within. Generally, Luffy uses this form to fight creatively and wackily, with out-of-left-field techniques like turning his fingers into a net, spinning his legs fast enough to hover in the air, and bouncing back cannonballs and bullets simply by letting his body catch and throw them back. His finishing moves generally consist of a series of rapid punches that batter his enemy's whole body, or a powerful leg drop that crushes them into the floor, if he doesn't just send them flying with a single punch first. Over time, as his physical strength in this form increases and he gains access to Haki, his more powerful forms become exponentially stronger in turn. Gear 2. Introduced alongside Gear 3 in the Enies Lobby arc, Gear 2 is a technique that Luffy develops specifically to match the increasingly powerful foes he begins facing in the Grand Line. By using his legs as a pump to speed up blood flow throughout his body, which begins emitting large amounts of steam, Luffy drastically increases his speed and reaction time, allowing him to overwhelm even government agents trained to move faster than the eye can follow. His arsenal of attacks generally remains unchanged from his base form, but they're now performed much faster and, consequently, with a lot more force, and he usually focuses on direct attacks instead of non-offensive techniques, because not only are the opponents he has to use this against too strong for him to waste time on, but using Gear 2 burns the candle at both ends, and shortens Luffy's lifespan by forcing his body to function at a much higher level than it normally does, which generally exhausts him much faster too. While fighting in this gear, Luffy adds Jet to all of his attack names to indicate their speed. Gear 3. Hinted at during Luffy's first usage of Gear 2, but only properly displayed during his climactic battle against Rob Lucci, his first opponent tough enough to warrant it, Gear 3 revolves entirely around Luffy's usually comical ability to inflate his body with air. Instead of inhaling it through his lungs just to inflate his stomach and chest, Luffy instead breathes in, then bites into his thumb to blow air directly into his arm bones, resulting in his arms growing to a massive size. While initially slower than even his base form attacks due to the increased weight of his limbs, Gear 3 attacks are massively stronger than Gear 2, with just a single punch nearly knocking out Lucci after he had tanked everything else Luffy had thrown at him with only minor injuries or annoyance. Luffy primarily uses this in his hands and feet to destroy large structures or to take on giant enemies, which makes him exponentially more dangerous than in his 2 previous forms. He's even combined it with Gear 2 once to use Gomu Gomu no Jet Shell, a massive blow that was also too fast for his equally large enemy to evade. However, the drawback is considerable. Every time Gear 3 is deactivated, Luffy shrinks to a childlike chibi form with very weak combat capabilities for an amount of time proportional to how long he was using Gear 3 prior, leaving him wide open to enemy attacks unless an ally is present to protect him. Thankfully, he managed to overcome this while training during the time skip, not least because the author and animators got sick of drawing him so small, and doing so also let him improve the speed of his Gear 3 attacks by fully concentrating the air into his hands and feet instead of spreading it through his arms and legs, allowing him to deliver attack barrages with devastating power. When fighting in this gear, Luffy adds Gigant to all of his attack names to indicate their size. Nightmare Luffy / Gear 3. This is a unique, one-time only form that required the unintentional usage of another devil fruit, the Kage Kage no Mi, to set up, but which can safely be regarded as Gear 3.5 due to the results. Nightmare Luffy appeared during Thriller Bark, after Luffy is stuffed with the shadows of 100 of Gecko Moria's victims to defeat him with. These shadows confer not only the skills of their previous owners, but their power as well, resulting in Luffy gaining an extreme increase in physical strength, durability, and speed that stretches his body into a much taller and more muscular form whose strength exceeds even Gear 3. While it only lasts for a couple chapters, Nightmare Luffy proves himself to be the strongest thing in any of Luffy's battles up until that point. He's able to catch a punch from the largest creature to ever walk the earth, Oars, with a single hand, and doesn't even flinch from the impact. And that's before he proceeds to manhandle the colossal giant by literally throwing him around Thriller Bark by his hair and performing a sideways Gomu Gomu no Storm that completely knocks him down, a feat that would otherwise take the entire Straw Hat crew to replicate. And unlike base Luffy, he also knows how to wield a sword with great skill. Not that he actually uses the gigantic sword he brings into battle more than once, but it's the thought that counts. The only real drawback is that, as mentioned before, this form only lasts for a few moments due to the shadows rejecting Luffy as not being their true owner. Gear 4, or Bound Man. Introduced during the Dressrosa arc when Luffy exhausts all other Gear 2 and 3 options against Don Quixote do Flamingo, the single strongest combatant anyone had faced up until that point, Gear 4 was originally developed by him during the 2-year time skip to combat the gigantic wild animals he had to contend with on Rusakaina, the island that Rayleigh trained him on. As a variant on Gear 3 and a nod to his nightmare form, Luffy blows airs into his arm muscles instead of bone, drastically increasing their strength while also spreading the size across his entire body instead of just one limb, and coating a large amount of his body in strengthened haki, spread more or less evenly with a unique flame pattern to it. The result is a larger and heavily muscled Luffy whose elastic properties are pushed to their logical limit. He's now so springy and bouncy that he can't even stay in one place properly, instead constantly bouncing off the ground. But he's also much more durable to even haki-coated attacks, as he can absorb their impact by flexing his body inward without suffering any damage. As for strength, well, after Doflamingo shrugged off all the Gears 2 and 3, a single punch from Gear 4 sent him flying a mile away before he could even process what happened, and there isn't a single attack after this that he can properly defend against whatsoever. Additionally, Luffy retains a capacity for unconventional tactics due to the strange properties of this form. He can fly by repeatedly pulling his feet into his legs and pushing them back out to propel himself in the air. His regular punch can extend indefinitely and change angles in midair to catch opponents even if they dodge it the first few times, and to top it all off, he can inject even more air into his fist to enlarge it to 5 times the size of his own body and release a blow strong enough to shatter an entire island. However, Bound Man isn't without his limits. To start with, Luffy's speed and evasive capabilities are hampered significantly by his top half-oriented physique, so while he can move fast in a straight line once he builds up momentum, he can't dodge or change course on the fly nearly as well as in Gear 2 or 3. Furthermore, his newfound durability has its limits as well. If his opponent has stronger haki than him, it can still be overcome by sufficiently powerful attacks. Finally, and most notably, usage of Gear 4 inflicts the most severe penalty of all. Luffy is left exhausted and unable to use his haki for 10 minutes. Just about a death sentence in the New World, unless, again, he has allies to not only protect, but keep him on the move until the time limit is reached. Both of these are mitigated to some degree as he continues his journey and uses the gear more to get used to it, though. While fighting in this gear, Luffy forms his attack names out of animal and artillery weapon names, such as Rhino Schneider and Snake Culverin. Tank Man. This is the least seen of all of Luffy's forms, though still quite interesting. When battling Charlotte Cracker, who could make endless armies of hard biscuit soldiers, Luffy finds himself hard-pressed to keep fighting with Bound Man, since Cracker's sword is sharp enough to pierce through its haki, and the biscuit soldiers, while not immune to its blows, are still sturdy enough that he can't fight through them to reach Cracker himself. The solution? Have Nami create rain clouds that soak the biscuit soldiers sufficiently to just eat his way through them. Now that is a Luffy tactic if there ever was one. Eventually, Luffy's eaten so much that he's a towering, rotund mass of flab, hardly able to move, and that's when he activates this special form of Gear 4, specified to be its full version, that coats him in enough haki to cover almost his entire torso and restores some of his musculature. The main draw of this form over Bound Man is that, so far as we saw against Cracker, it's almost invulnerable to damage. When Cracker tried to impale Luffy, his stomach just folded over the blade without being pierced, and proceeded to suck both it and Cracker in. This then allowed Luffy to use his only apparent offensive technique by pushing his belly out and expelling Cracker at immense speed, incapacitating him immediately through forcing him to crash not only through several of his own dry biscuit soldiers, but into the side of a mountain several islands away with Gomu Gomu no Cannonball, making its offensive power under the right circumstances quite clear. However, its drawbacks are just as evident. Luffy simply can't move from where he activates the technique, and the only time we saw it necessitated him eating an almost literal ton of food beforehand to accrue the necessary bulk, so it's extremely situational at best. Snake Man. And here we have the third and final variation of Gear 4, though not nearly as limited in usage as Tank Man. In fact, we've seen this almost as much as we have Bound Man by now. While battling Charlotte Katakuri, whose sheer combat skills and prowess with his mochi-based devil fruit allow him to mirror everything Luffy can pull off with much more power and speed, Luffy, now developing a slight precognition of his own, realizes that he needs to at least match Katakuri in speed, so he switches from Bound Man to this, a much slimmer Gear 4 that concentrates the haki along his arms and legs, while also having him curl his knuckles at the second joint instead of the first, drawing from the leopard fist style of martial arts. For Snake Man, speed is the name of the game. Its main draw is that Luffy's attacks become faster the longer they're performed, so an opponent who dodges the first or second strike will eventually be hit and find themselves on the receiving end of a much stronger blow than if they had just taken it initially. He can also move and react more quickly than in any other Gear 4 form, potentially up to the speed of Gear 2. However, the trade-off for this is his defensive capabilities. Attacks do as much damage to him as they would if he weren't in Gear 4 at all, and he doesn't bounce off of things like Bound Man. So this is very much a glass cannon technique for combat and is mainly reserved for the fastest of his opponents. Gear 5/Nika/Joy Boy. And finally, there's the apex of Luffy's power and capabilities. Gear 5, known to some as Nika, but to the readers as the awakening of his devil fruit. All the way back in Dressrosa, Doflamingo explained that a devil fruit's awakening allows its user to apply its properties and effects to other things, mostly inanimate. Against Kaido, Luffy is pushed to his utter limits with Gear 4 Bound Man and Snake Man, as well as his Ryo and Color of Conqueror's Haki, and just before he and Kaido can end it with one final clash, a member of CP0 intervenes on behalf of the world government to restrain Luffy, preventing him from attacking Kaido or defending against the latter's brutal attack. Luffy goes down and seemingly dies, with Gear 4 dissipating and his life force disappearing from everyone's Haki perception, but then his heartbeat begins beating again, a strange rhythm akin to a drumbeat, and Zunisha the elephant, who's been around for over 1,000 years, proclaims that this marks the return of Joy Boy. Resuscitated by this inadvertent activation and evolution of his power, Luffy undergoes a dramatic change. While his shape and size remain the same, his hair turns a glowing white and takes the shape of the Gomu Gomu no Mi. His clothes bleach white as well, and he gains a collar of white smoke around his shoulders and head, all while his haki explodes in strength and scope. As the 5 elder stars of the world government proceed to explain, this is the true awakened power of the Gomu Gomu no Mi, otherwise known as the Hito Hito no Mi Model Nika, utter freedom, the most ridiculous power in the world. And what does that look like? Well, simply put, Luffy can make his body do anything now with just a thought. No longer needing to apply force or inhale and blow up air to set up his attacks, his limbs can now extend and enlarge as he sees fit, allowing him to pull off truly insane feats like enlarging his entire body at once, grabbing Kaido's dragon form and using it as a jump rope, and naturally curving his punch in an arc to hit an enemy from the side. His durability is also on another level altogether. Even compared to Gear 4, now that his body is as free as it's ever been, it just wraps around many attacks without taking any damage, and it takes a lot of speed just to reach Luffy in the first place. Most notably, this being an awakening means Luffy can indeed apply his attributes to other things, making him akin to a classic cartoon character like Popeye or Bugs Bunny. Grabbing someone and yanking them back causes their eyes to bug out of their head, ripping up the ground lets him form a wall that can bounce back an energy beam like a ping pong ball, and even intangible things like lightning can be held onto and shaped as he sees fit. All that, and he can now perform attacks strong enough to take down Yonkos and Admirals. A drastically larger version of Bound Man's King Kong gun, delivering enough force to punch someone down to bedrock, and a punch to the head simply called Star Gun that pushes his fist through their brain and leaves them unable to stand up at best. Luffy's not wrong to call this the pinnacle of what he can do. But this doesn't make Gear 5 perfect. Like Gears 2 and 4, usage of this exhausts Luffy, but to a far greater extent than either of them. Against Kaido, when he lost concentration for a moment, Luffy aged up by what looked like several decades, which was only reversed when he consciously forced his heart to beat in the right rhythm, and otherwise even a brief usage of this leaves him too tired to move for several minutes. In the ongoing Egghead arc, it's also noted in passing that usage of Gear 5 and any awakening of a mythical Zoan fruit runs the risk of the deity that the fruit is named after, in this case Nika, taking over the user's mind, though the true consequences of this have yet to be seen as it hasn't yet come to pass. Tellingly, when battling Kizaru in the same arc, and despite knowing full well how dangerous the former was, Luffy opted to use Snake Man against him first before resorting to Gear 5 when almost defeated. As powerful as it is, it provides an equally heightened risk. Well, that just about does it for this analysis and recap of Luffy's various forms, and we encourage anyone who's interested in the series to support the official release and read and watch the official translations of the manga and anime. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Thanks for watching, peace.